Yuri Gagarin, major in the Soviet Air Force, is the first to cross the frontier into the unknown of space. 27 years old, swarthy, handsome, highly trained, married to a medical student, the father of 2 girls. Occupation, cosmonaut, the world's first.
Yuri Gagarin and the Soviet space program, humanity's first steps towards a future in the stars. By conducting the first manned mission into space, Yuri Gagarin and the Soviet space program broke scientific, technological, social, and political barriers, thus propelling mankind into a new age of human development. On August 15, 1945, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito announced his nation's unconditional surrender to American forces. With World War II finally at a close, 2 new superpowers would emerge on the global stage, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both vying for power for their respective ideologies of capitalism and communism, the worlds would be brought into a 45-year conflict, characterized by a series of proxy wars in former European colonies and the space race.
So the space race arises as a part of the Cold War, this geopolitical conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union in terms of economies, politics, culture, technology, and really a fight for world domination in terms of both ideas and territory.
On October 4, 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik 1 into space. This was the world's first artificial satellite and would stay in orbit for 3 months, after which it returned to Earth. Historians still debate the justifications of this mission, whether it was a technological mission to advance humanity or propaganda designed to instill fear throughout the world. About a month after the launch of Sputnik 1, on November 3, 1957, Sputnik 2 would be launched into space, carrying a dog, Laika. Although Laika would end up losing her life in space, the ability of the Soviets to launch satellites sent a clear message to the United States. The space race had begun, and the Soviets were winning. The United States' immediate response was to send up a satellite of their own. On January 31, 1958, Explorer 1 was sent into Earth's orbit, flying 903.5 miles high. This satellite marked the first American endeavor into space, and on July 29, 1958, President Eisenhower would strengthen American efforts by forming the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, along with the Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA. The Soviets, on the other hand, had launched their own organized space program on July 31, 1956, known as the Space Program of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. With the respective governments pouring money and resources into each program, a new reality of the space race was formed. 4 years after the launch of Sputnik 2, the Soviet Union would send the Vostok 1 into Earth's orbit. Although it was originally intended to be an intercontinental ballistic missile, it was repurposed by putting a capsule on top, which allowed what was basically a bomb to launch a human into space. On board the Vostok 1 was a life-size dummy known as Ivan Ivanovich, along with the dog named Zvezdochka, who was named by Yuri Gagarin. The success of this voyage alone broke many technological barriers, showing that life could survive in space. The Vostok 1, the world's first reusable spacecraft, would be launched into space again a few weeks later, this time carrying human life. On April 12, 1961, at 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, Yuri Gagarin was launched into the cosmos.
He was the first human to leave this planet and get beyond the atmosphere and go into Earth orbit.
Gagarin was born on March 9, 1934 in Kushino, a small village which would later bear his name, roughly 100 miles from Moscow. He would develop an interest in aeronautics from a young age and would later join the Soviet Air Force. After successes there and receiving prestigious honors from his commander, he began training to become a cosmonaut. A few years later, the Soviet government began the process of finding a cosmonaut to travel to space. They had originally selected 20 men between the ages of 25 and 35, and Gagarin, being a senior lieutenant at the time and 27 years old, had been chosen. Gagarin stood out.
I think people saw in him that he was something of a leader. As I said, he was very personable and handsome, which helped.
I talked with him a number of times. I thought he was a very fine character.
His character, background, and intelligence made him the ideal man to be the first cosmonaut to travel to space, and so Sergei Korolev, the head of the mission, on April 8, 1961, revealed that Gagarin had been chosen. At the beginning of the mission, there was a slight technical issue. The mechanical system operating the door and keeping it shut broke. However, after the issue was resolved, Gagarin was able to take off and the flight went according to plan. He did land a few miles away from the intended landing spot, but this slight miscalculation proved to have little effect in the overall success of the mission.
Even today, very few people realize the significance of getting yourself away from the Earth, 17,500 miles an hour, reiterating just being able to walk away.
Welcomed with crowds of hundreds of thousands gathered in the Red Square, Gagarin was immediately heralded as a hero across the Soviet Union. Upon return, he also became an important figure in Soviet politics. Along with becoming the commander of the Cosmonauts Detachment, he became a deputy of the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union, the most important legislative body in the nation. He was also awarded the Order of Lenin and named Hero of the Soviet Union, the most prestigious awards he could receive. Monuments were raised to him, and streets and cities would bear his name.
One of the barriers that Gagarin broke is he really becomes a national and international celebrity in the space age. And he is the first person to do that, as the first person to go into space.
Proving the Soviet Union was a force to be reckoned with, the advancement made by the Soviets came as a huge embarrassment to the United States. As a result, the US would send the first American, Alan Shepard, into space. Unfortunately for the Americans, Shepard only reached suborbital levels. More importantly, however, the Soviets' accomplishments in the space race would also inspire President Kennedy's groundbreaking 1961 speech.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
A year after that speech, John Glenn would be sent into space and be the first American to fully orbit the Earth in a flight akin to Gagarin. At that point, the United States finally reached the scientific and technological levels the Soviets had demonstrated with Gagarin a year earlier. Eventually, on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 would launch from NASA's Kennedy Space Center, taking Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins all the way to the moon. Despite early setbacks, the United States won the space race. Even though Gagarin didn't live to see regular space travel, his efforts and those of the Soviet space program would lead to breaking social, political, scientific, and considerable technological barriers. Prior to his mission, scientists were unsure how space, specifically the weightlessness known to space, would affect a human.
But there were actually people at the time who thought that humans might go insane because they were weightless, or because of the isolation of being in that tiny capsule, hundreds of miles away from any other humans going around the Earth, or that the radiation might affect our brains. We now know that it's not easy, but humans can live in space.
This technology, along with several others, would be further developed and used by the Americans and Soviets in later long-term missions.
A lot of that technology has been used in many, many other areas today.
However, despite the many opportunities these new technologies would bring, they would also open the door to new weapons that forever changed the course of how wars would be fought. Humanity would be held hostage by the fear of mutually assured destruction, a world where mankind has the ability to commit omnicide with ease. The next few years would end up being some of the most tumultuous in human history. Whether it be the escalation of the space race, the scare of the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the increased American and Soviet presence in Vietnam, the clash of ideologies between communism and capitalism would escalate, and mankind would only become more divided. However, Gagarin's mission would also open humanity to a wide future of possibilities. Just 14 years after the launch of the Vostok 1, the United States and Soviet Union would work together to launch the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975, further shattering societal barriers between the two nations. 20 years later, international cooperation would once again be seen in space with the launch of the International Space Station on November 20th, 1998. The social barriers broken during Gagarin's mission would allow for the cooperation seen for the International Space Station to be built, where groundbreaking research is currently being conducted. Even life here on Earth is dependent on the technological advancements made during the space race.
Our whole civilization is now dependent on space. It's communication satellites, it's weather satellites, it's navigation satellites, it's in the global connectedness that all of that creates.
This mission by Gagarin would allow all of humanity to come together and celebrate under the banner of scientific achievement. As a result, the social and political barriers broken would bring people of all races, creeds, genders, and nationalities together. As Gagarin said, "Earth is blue, without boundaries, all countries united, indescribable show, a one of a kind." From space, the barriers which divide nations are broken. There's only an overview of one magnificent Earth, where all humans are equal and united. In the end, as Stephen Hawking once put it, we are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star, but we can understand the universe. That makes us something very special. Although his flight would only last for 108 minutes, its effects will be felt as long as man survives.